Of all the legal requirements for statehood outlined in Part 1, there is one that has proven a sticking point for some aspiring nations. Not surprisingly, that sometimes elusive requirement is the one that may not lie in the full control of those pushing to create a new sovereign entity: recognition by existing states. Perhaps the easiest way to show the importance of this requirement is to travel to a couple of regions where that recognition has been withheld. Our first destination is the self-proclaimed Transnistrian Moldavian Republic, or Transnistria for short. Sandwiched between the Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova, this small piece of the planet is home to approximately 500,000 residents. Its roots as an attempted independent modern state are rather recent, though its territory has hosted human guests for centuries. It was the breakup of the Soviet Union in the 1990s that triggered the chain of events leading to the creation of Transnistria. The land now held as the territory of Transnistria was formerly part of the Moldovan Soviet Socialist Republic. Many ethnic Russians were not comfortable becoming part of the emerging nation of Moldova, with its historical, linguistic, and ethnic ties to Romania. After a short military conflict, a ceasefire resulted in the drawing of boundaries which the locals now consider international borders. Travelers are subjected to a passport check and need an entry visa. After almost 3 decades of the status quo, Transnistria does not seem to be going away anytime soon. Even without international recognition of its statehood, life goes on regardless. As long as one has some powerful friends, the absence of international recognition does not seem to prevent groups from enjoying full autonomy. Another example of an attempted state forged in the embers of conflict is the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. As we explore in the Living Law Nations episode, the island of Cyprus has hosted dozens of ethnicities and empires over the centuries. But it was events which culminated in violent conflict in 1974 which created the stalemate which has existed on the island ever since. Since warfare did not lead to a resolution in the 20th century, in the 21st century some individuals began trying lawfare. There was later a potential breakthrough when the majority of residents of both Cyprus and the nation of Turkey desired to join the European Union. For the twists and turns of that saga, one can watch the Nations episode. For our current topic, Northern Cyprus represents another example of the importance of international recognition of statehood. Since its creation and down to the present, only Turkey recognizes it as a state. The Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus presents another example of the importance of international recognition of statehood. Even more so than Transnistria, parts of the island seem to be existing in suspended animation, a true legal limbo. It is not always ethnicity or religion which defines national borders. Sometimes politics and ideology become the deciding factors. In the 20th century, we saw examples of societies and even families separated on account of wider ideological contests. Perhaps the best-known example is Germany, which was divided for roughly 4 decades following World War II. As it began to become clear that a single German state could not be agreed upon by the 4 Allied powers, the 3 Western powers organized a constitutional convention in a rather out-of-the-way location in southern Bavaria. Not surprisingly, the Soviets were not in support of the efforts of the Western occupying powers to move Germany in a particular political direction. They used their influence in the territory they controlled in eastern Germany to bring about the creation of an alternative German state with a socialist constitution and following a centrally planned economy. By 1949, there were two competing versions of Germany, with reunification seeming an increasingly unlikely prospect. By 1953, the division had taken on bizarre dimensions, with towns and even buildings literally cut in half as a result of the geopolitical competition. That would remain the situation for almost 4 decades. To get a somewhat different perspective on this development, we will leave bustling Berlin for a markedly different setting. Scenes of the wall and the barbed wire which carved up Berlin are generally well known. But the border which separated East from West Germany ran a total of 866 miles, or 1,393 kilometers, from north to south. As in Berlin, the borders often had so-called no-man zones, heavily patrolled and monitored by the respective military forces. The legal basis for all this division was an agreement between the Allied powers on zones of occupation. One of the few things the two opposite sides agreed upon was the need to stamp out any remaining elements of Nazi ideology in the societies on each side of the border. It took the collapse of the Soviet Union to make an end of the German division even conceivable. In 1989, the wall which had separated the two Germanys began to fall. Within a year, both German states were merged into one. These days, the physical legacies of that Cold War are popular tourist attractions for visitors to Berlin. In that kind of setting, it's difficult to appreciate just how precarious the situation often was, especially in a period with nuclear weapons. Not all divisions have already seen a happy ending. On the Korean Peninsula, an ideological contest which escalated to war led to a split of a nation whose roots go back centuries. The 38th parallel now marks the spot where the Republic of Korea, or South Korea, ends, and the People's Democratic Republic of Korea, or North Korea, begins. The two sides, including many families, have been separated by a 4-kilometer-wide demilitarized zone ever since. Compared to Germany, where there was still a level of contact between citizens of East and West Germany, the division of Korea into two halves has been more or less absolute. Despite censorship and propaganda, citizens of both Germanys had some level of information about the other side. The level of media transmission jamming and other measures to control information were not as great as have existed in Korea. Periodic efforts at cooperation and dialogue have led to some joint efforts, like the industrial complex at Kaesong. At the time of production, even this had been shut down and suspended indefinitely. Despite recent talks between the presidents of the United States and North Korea, the division of the two Koreas appears intractable. Ideology and politics have trumped ethnic and historical ties to prevent the recreation of a single Korean state. An equally controversial and complex division with its roots in history and ideology is that of Greater China. As we saw in the Living Law Nation series, China as a nation has 3 main manifestations. 1. The People's Republic of China. a country of roughly 1.4 billion citizens and with a communist form of government. 2. The island of Taiwan, which became home to the Chinese nationalist forces after a horrific World War II and subsequent Civil War. The People's Republic of China still considers Taiwan its territory, and the two sides have clashed militarily on several occasions. 3. Hong Kong, a product of 19th century European colonialism, and since 1997 legally part of the People's Republic of China. Under an agreement reached between the United Kingdom and the People's Republic, Hong Kong was to enjoy a high degree of autonomy and self-rule for a period of 50 years. The approach, known as One Country, Two Systems, is covered in detail in the episode on Hong Kong. Recent events around the time of production have cast doubt on the viability of the approach and raised concerns about the preservation of Hong Kong's special status. It is the Taiwan case which truly exemplifies the somewhat fickle nature of this particular legal requirement of statehood. During the Cold War, the Republic of Taiwan was recognized by several nations, mainly from the West. Ever since the détente and opening of trade relations with the People's Republic of China, that number has steadily dwindled. The shift in recognition by other states from the Republic of China to the People's Republic of China was followed by increasingly aggressive claims made by the People's Republic to the territory of the island of Taiwan. Bilateral talks have gone some way to reduce tensions, but at the time of production there was increased noise around the possibility of China taking Taiwan by force. That could easily trigger a much broader conflict. The dispute over Taiwan touches upon all the classic elements of legal statehood: control over territory, a population, a functioning government, and relations with other states. Hopefully, a resolution can be found which does not trigger World War III. Faced with that dire prospect, it might be time for some more light-hearted examples. In creating the Living Law Nation series, we also encountered efforts of communities to preserve a certain lifestyle, usually one different from the mainstream. These were not so much attempts at creating a separate state, in the legal sense of the term, though they often reflect some of the elements of states. In Living Law Denmark, we visited a semi-autonomous community which has its origins in the counterculture movement of the 1960s and 70s. Despite having several features of statehood, including a defined population, control over a particular territory, and a form of government, Christiania is unlikely to ever be deemed a state. Just what it is and may become are actually issues which have been litigated in the Danish courts. In another Living Law Topical episode, we examine the impact of law on art and expression. The output of some of the artistic movements reviewed in that episode was sometimes considered illegal. Artists frequently push the boundaries of both society and law. They provide additional color on the drivers behind groups' attempts to formalize their communal activities and shared beliefs. We came across just such a community in Living Law Lithuania. The self-proclaimed Republic of Užupis meets many of the requirements of statehood, even if its proponents are only half serious about their communal project. The Užupis district had been predominantly Jewish until World War II. During Soviet times and right up to independence, it was one of the most derelict neighborhoods in Vilnius. Post-independence, it became increasingly popular with local artists who began creating a bohemian utopia in the Lithuanian capital.
Just across the river Vilnia, which gives Vilnius its name, is the Republic of Užupis. And this is a colony of craftsmen and artists, which apparently have their own assembly, president, prime minister, army of about a dozen people, and even a constitution.
The Constitution of the Užupis Republic contains 41 articles. Though inspirational, its provisions are slightly different from what we've seen in relation to the Republic of Lithuania's constitution. Having covered both lingering divisions and successful reunifications, it's time to move on to our third and final subtopic, the durability of individual states.